Good morning, everybody. For as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a photographer. My mum and dad, they bought me my first camera, a small plastic Fisher-Price camera, at the age of about 6 or 7. And literally, I've been using it ever since. Here's a picture of me using that very same blue plastic camera. I went on to study photography at university in the UK. And then on graduating, I literally left the UK and moved to Asia. First to China, then to Thailand. And 15 years later, I'm still here working as a professional photographer for clients around the world, from NGOs to magazines to newspapers. My work is predominantly documentary and portrait photography. And over the years, I've photographed a whole range of different issues, not just in Thailand, but also further afield. And they've included subjects, environmental subjects, such as this taken in Cambodia, to social issues. This was photographed in Bangladesh. Cultural topics. This was photographed in Peru. And somewhere closer to home in Isan, this was photographed in Loei province and is one of the subjects that I covered. But over the years, I've become increasingly concerned with the plight of certain communities in Thailand that have basically been forced to stand up and fight for their rights in order to protect their communities and their villages from a range of different issues, ranging from the dumping of toxic wastes to illegal logging. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time with some communities and really grown very close to them. And I've focused my work on trying to tell their stories, and indeed, with my photography, try to help in some way. In 2015, one such project emerged called For Those Who Died Trying. Now, For Those Who Died Trying is a photographic tribute to Thai human rights defenders who have been murdered or disappeared in Thailand in the last 30 years. And whilst drawing attention to their specific cases and fights for which they were fighting for, it also looks to highlight the issue of corruption and impunity that firstly allowed these terrible events to happen, but also often allowed the perpetrators to get away with it. I saw that outside of the human rights circles, NGO circles in Thailand, Thai society at large knew very little about these communities and the battles that they fought, let alone the actual human rights defenders themselves. But some of them had made the ultimate sacrifice and died fighting for what they believed in. But now I felt that their memory was essentially disappearing, if not already gone. And I felt that that memory had to be preserved, and they had to be remembered for what they had done. My journey into this subject all began with one person, and that is this lady here called Jintana Gelkau. Now, she is an environmental rights defender from Prachuapkhirikan province in southern Thailand. About 5 to 6 years ago, I was asked to meet Jintana, photograph her, interview her for another project. But I became so inspired by her as a person and so completely fascinated by her story that I kept going back to see her. And we became friends. And she was really the first person that brought this issue to light to me personally. Before I met her, I knew very little about this subject. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jintana's story is really quite a remarkable one. She was just an ordinary villager. She was a shopkeeper. She was a wife. She was a mother. But then about 20 years ago, she was essentially forced to become the leader of a small community environmental group. that was formed solely to oppose the construction of a coal-powered power plant that a company was trying to build next to their community. At the beginning, this small community environmental group had no idea about how to take on such an opponent, such a powerful, such a rich opponent. They'd never done it before. But throughout this prolonged struggle that went on for many, many years, this group learned the laws and they used them. They learned their rights and they stood up for them. And in a landmark case in Thailand, this small community environmental group won in court and the power plant was never built. This picture that you see here is the exact location where that power plant would have been built. So, whilst the power plant not being built is obviously a good thing, it came at huge personal sacrifice to Kun Jintana herself. She had assassination attempts made against her. She was arrested. She was imprisoned. She had to have her children go and live with relatives because it was too dangerous for them to stay at home. And even to this day, she has 2 plainclothes policemen that stay at her house all the time. Anywhere she goes, they go as well. On one such visit to see Kun Jintana, she told me of another story, of another environmental rights defender, also in Kirikan province, not far from where Jintana lives. And he went by the name of Jalern Wat Akson. Now, Kun Jalern is, like Jintana, was the leader of a small community environmental group that was also opposing the construction of another coal-powered power plant that a different company wanted to build next to his community. This is the only photograph I have of Kun Jalern, because unfortunately I've never been able to meet him. In 2004, as he was returning from Bangkok by bus, and he got off at the bus stop on the main road that runs through Kirikan province, he was shot dead by 2 gunmen who'd been waiting for him. The family, his family, refused to cremate the body until they feel they have justice, until they feel that they have justice for what happened. And 14 years later, Kun Jalern remains here, across the road from where he was killed. Now, Jintana and Jalern were good friends. They protested together. They were the same type of people, fighting on behalf of their community, for their community. But whereas Jintana survived and was able to tell her story, and indeed continue to inspire future generations, like she'd inspired me, Kun Jalern couldn't. So at that moment of hearing these 2 stories, I wondered, how many more people have died under similar circumstances to Kun Jalern? And I began to research. Now, it didn't take me very long until I was able to make a list of about 20 people. Now, the fact that I could make that list in the first place was shocking, quite frankly. And I made it my mission to try to tell this story. But first, I had to work out, how do I tell this story with my skill that was photography? And this was one of the most important things to get right at the beginning. The topic was exceedingly sensitive, especially to the families and the communities involved. The people that I wanted to talk about were already gone, some as far back as 30 years ago. So how could I, as a foreigner, produce a documentary that, with respect and with sensitivity, but ultimately would impact the viewer at the end? And so I thought a lot, and I talked with people, friends, family in Bangkok, and one idea emerged. As most of you in this room will know, there's a Thai tradition. When somebody dies, the family select a portrait of the deceased. That portrait is then taken to the temple, where it's placed next to the coffin and used throughout the duration of the funeral service. After the funeral's finished and the body is cremated, that photograph is taken home. where it's placed on a wall, on a shelf, in a cupboard, but it's generally kept. So that made me think, well, maybe if I can locate the families of these human rights defenders that have died, then perhaps there would be a photograph of them. And then I could photograph that photograph inside their house, wherever it was, or maybe somebody was holding it like this. But I kind of felt that that wasn't good enough. And then one day, I was researching more cases on the internet, and I looked at a Thai news website. And on that Thai news website was a photograph, a police crime scene photograph showing 2 women who'd been shot dead in a palm oil plantation. Around the edge of this photograph were people looking at the crime scene. I don't know who these people were, but they made me think that if I was able to locate the families, and if they give me permission to use the photograph, then maybe I could ask them to take me to the exact place, or certainly as close as we could possibly get, to where the murder happened. And then by placing the photograph there, it would represent the last time that person was ever seen alive. And it would create a much more powerful photo series. Was it even possible? I had absolutely no idea. But a good friend of mine agreed to help me, and he navigated, I drove, and we left Bangkok with the list of 20 human rights defenders that I had. We returned, say, several weeks later with 17 portraits. So indeed it was possible. This is the portrait I took of Kun Jalern at the exact location where he was shot in 2004. What made this project even harder was that we had no idea who these families were. We had no contact details. We had no telephone numbers. We had no addresses. All we had was a name of that person and a case description. And within that case description, we hoped there would be a name of a village or the name of a district. We put that into the GPS, and we just drove in that direction. When we got close to where we felt we needed to be, we'd begin to ask people, do you know this person? Are the family still here? We'd like to meet them. They'd either say yes, go there, or no, and we'd ask somebody else. That's how we did it. Sometimes we drove for 4 to 5 hours in one direction, only to arrive at a village, and the family had left, and nobody knew where they'd gone. So I had 17 portraits on my computer in Bangkok, and then this project sort of hit a wall. I was failing to find any more cases, despite feeling that there definitely was some. I'd also run out of money. Freelance photographers, we're not rich people. We don't do it for the money. And I was funding this all by myself. And it was at this transitional period that I was introduced to Protection International. Now, Protection International is a human rights NGO headquartered in Brussels, in Belgium. They work to support and provide advice and security to human rights defenders around the world. Without my knowing, Protection International had been researching this very same topic. But because of their expertise in the subject, their list had over 50 people on it. That was more than double what I had managed to find myself. So it was a natural fit, and we decided to work together. And with their support and their new research, off myself and my friend, we drove again. And we drove back to Isan. And we drove back to the north as far as Chiang Rai. And we drove down to the south as far as Satun. And ultimately returned to Bangkok with 35 photographs representing 37 people. And to get these 37 people, we had to drive almost 10,000 kilometers in the process. This is the scene I was telling you about earlier. This is Kun Monta Chukgeo and Kun Brani Bunlat. They were shot together whilst driving their motorbikes back to their communities on the 19th of November 2012 in Suratani province. They were fighting for the rights of their community. This is Mr. Prajob Now Orpas. He was shot 4 times whilst fixing his pickup truck at this garage on the 25th of February 2013 in Chachoengsao province. And this gentleman, I'm sure most of you here will recognize him. This is Somchai Neelapajit, the husband of Pi Ankana Neelapajit, who is actually with us here today. Kun Somchai was abducted in central Bangkok on the 12th of March 2004 and never seen again. At the time of his abduction, as a lawyer, he was defending the rights of defendants from the Deep South. And here is all 37 human rights defenders. And when you look at this picture, I want you all to remember that they aren't only farmers or villagers in remote locations. In these photographs are lawyers, there are policemen, there are teachers, and there are government officials. Everybody in these photographs were good people fighting for what was right for their community or for somebody else's. After completing this project, Protection International then began to organize a series of exhibitions around Thailand, including the pictures you see outside this room today. They've exhibited in over 10 locations around the country. And those locations have varied in size hugely, from large art galleries in Bangkok to universities to small community centers in remote villages. But for all of these exhibitions, Protection International invited lawyers, professors, NGOs, human rights defenders themselves, and just anybody who wanted to come and listen, to discuss and debate and talk about the issue at large in these pictures. This opportunity to debate this subject was severely needed in this country. Because whilst the response from Thai society at large about this project was incredibly supportive, they really understood what I was trying to achieve, there was also a great sense of shock, a sense of shock that I had not anticipated would come. There was also a sense of anger and sadness, and just a general feeling about not knowing the full scale of this issue. But this project, these photographs, had made it impossible to ignore anymore. And that these brave human rights defenders did not die in vain. They will be remembered for what they did, and in a way, through these photographs, are still fighting to fight for what is right. But we can't just leave it to them alone. We all need to come together, work together, to make sure that from now on, no more people die from trying. Thank you very much.